This is the story of a pharmacist who was so dedicated to his work that he ended up losing his life, but gained a second chance when he was reincarnated in a new world with divine powers of medicine. In this new place, he gained magical abilities that he used to heal various people while attracting the attention of several attractive women. When he finally opens his eyes, the first thing he sees is a pink-haired girl calling him Master Pharma, saying that he was struck by lightning, but that he should stay calm. However, her voice strikes him as strange, and he wonders what is going on. He goes to the window and upon opening it, is faced with a huge garden, with a city in the background. The pink-haired woman shows Yakutani a mirror, and he realizes that his appearance is totally different from what he had in his previous life. He is unsure if it is all a strange dream or memories of a past life, and the woman named Charlotte introduces herself again as Lottie and says she will be at his service, as she always has been. Looking at his wrists, Yakutani sees the notes he made during the night, and Lottie notices a scar on his arm caused by the impact of the lightning bolt, and believes it to be a sacred mark from the god of drugs, expressing his gratitude. Yakutani, however, explains that it is just a Lichtenberg figure, a burn caused by lightning, and questions why she was praying. She looks at him with gratitude and says that the god of drugs protected her master's life. Lottie, moved, tells Pharma that she needed to pray to give thanks for that. Curious, Pharma ends up asking if this god of drugs was some kind of deity linked to disasters, leaving Lottie completely shocked. She eagerly explained that the god of drugs was, in fact, the god of medicine, and that he was very welcome and appreciated in her family. Pharma, still confused, asked Lottie to clarify a few things. She mentioned that the Medicis family was a great aristocratic house of the Empire of St. Fleuve, known for being a family of royal pharmacists. Her father, Master Bruno de Medicis, held the title of Archduke, a position granted to nobles with remarkable abilities and even higher than the title of Duke. Lotta went on to explain that her father also served as president of the Imperial School of Pharmacy, and she showed Pharma a portrait of Bruno and his wife Lady Beatrice, mentioning that their little sister Blanche was sitting on her mother's lap. In addition, their older brother Master Payne was studying abroad at the University of Medicine in New Lourdes. Bruno always carried the hope of seeing his children follow the path of pharmacy and the divine arts. Lotta then comments that these arts were like miracles, similar to magic, which makes Pharma curious enough to ask if he could also use this kind of power. But upon hearing this, Lotta becomes uneasy, realizing that Pharma seemed to have forgotten that he already mastered the divine arts of water. While Pharma was in his room trying to remember how to use the divine art, a tip from Lotta came to his mind. He should imagine the structure of water for it to appear. So he began to recall the molecules of water and his arm began to glow, causing water to appear before his eyes. He ran to the window to release the water and try to control it. However, when he released the water, Pharma ended up getting Lotta wet. But to his surprise, she wasn't upset or sad, but rather very happy, because Pharma had remembered how to use the divine art of water. Pharma was intrigued by his discoveries about his peculiar abilities. He experimented with different chemical combinations in search of simple substances that couldn't be mixed. He soon realized that his left hand could generate substances and his right hand could erase them, as long as he knew the chemical composition of each one. While testing all this, Lotta, his closest friend, enters the room and praises how much progress he was making. But her expression quickly changes when she imagines that Pharma may have lost some of his medical knowledge, and she warns him to be careful, since Bruno had a habit of asking unexpected questions about medicine right at mealtimes. Later, during dinner, Bruno wasted no time and asked Pharma a question. How was the Gurid ointment which was used to treat his arms made? Pharma confidently replied that the ointment was made from herbs, catico oil, lizard oils, and ground bat wings. He explained that everything was boiled during the night of the full moon, after purifying himself and praying, and then dried in the sun for 3 days and crushed until it reached the right consistency. The next day, Pharma had a class with Kichulita Eleanor, but something was different about him. He was too calm, and his way of speaking had changed. Eleanor found it strange, and noticed that he called her Ellen. Curious, she asked him the reason for this change, but Pharma explained that his memory was confused due to the lightning incident. Afraid of how much he remembered, Ellen decided to put pharmacology classes aside, and go back to the basics of the divine arts with him. She explained that all aristocrats are born with an affinity for these arts, and that each one carries a guardian deity. In the case of Pharma, his brother, and his father, the guardian was the god of drugs. In addition, she mentioned the 5 attributes of the divine arts: fire, water, air, earth, and nothingness, each subdivided into positive and negative. Intrigued, Pharma asked about the attribute of nothingness, and Ellen explained that although it technically existed, it had not been seen in 300 years, and even she herself doubted whether it really existed. Curious about the nature of his own abilities, Pharma questioned which attribute would belong to someone capable of creating a substance, and Ellen replied that having such an ability was unthinkable, as the attributes that can be created are fixed, and someone with such power would be considered a god, or a monster. To practice the divine arts, they went to a stream, but Ellen realized that Pharma had forgotten his divine staff, and without hesitation she decided to lend him hers. Ellen, determined to help Pharma regain his skills in the divine arts, began with a demonstration of the water spear, one of the most basic techniques. She asked Pharma to practice this attack, even though she knew he had already mastered this technique before losing his memory. However, considering his current situation, it was better to start from the basics. Even though he tried to do everything right, when Pharma launched the attack, something totally unexpected happened. The blow came out so strong that he couldn't control his own strength. Realizing that he had let his emotions get out of control, Ellen ran to get a divinity meter, the device used to measure the level of divine power. To their surprise, Pharma exceeded all the values recorded on the divinity meter, something that had never happened before. Concerned, Ellen asked Pharma never to hold the divinity meter near anyone, not even his father, as his power was incomprehensible and potentially dangerous. After all this, they sat on a bench to rest and reflect on what had happened. Concerned about Ellen, she shared tips on how she could regain her vision, as she was unable to see well, and as she demonstrated the technique, something extraordinary happened. Pharma's vision changed, allowing him to see that Ellen had sprained her finger. Surprised, Ellen realized that Pharma had a divine eye, a rare ability that allowed him to see beyond the ordinary. In addition, she noticed that Pharma had no shadow, an intriguing manifestation of his divine nature. Frightened by these revelations, Ellen felt a wave of fear and discomfort. She asked Pharma to keep his distance and, overcome with anxiety, fled into the woods, seeking to understand and process everything she had witnessed. Sometime later, due to a high fever, Eleanor was unable to teach Pharma and decided she no longer wanted to continue with his lessons. Bruno then asked Pharma if he knew why Eleanor no longer wanted to teach him. Pharma recalled the events of the previous day, but said that perhaps the fever had shaken her. It was then that Bruno asked Pharma to take a potion and a letter to Eleanor. In Pharma's room, he realized that the potion was just a type of vitamin, and if Eleanor really had a fever, she would need something different. While waiting for Eleanor, she appeared wearing heavy armor and asked what the purpose of his visit was, if he was there to eliminate her. Pharma explained that no, he had come there without even his staff, and the reason for his visit was only to deliver a potion that his father had asked him to bring. Eleanor suspected that the potion might be poisoned, but Pharma denied it, and said he had brought another medicine, as well as an ointment for her sprained finger, along with some instructions. However, Eleanor still suspected poisoning. Pharma assured her that he had no intention of hurting her, and that in fact, he would like her to continue teaching him. Eleanor asked why, mentioning that he was the reincarnation of a drug god, but Pharma explained that this was not the case, as he was still only human, not a god. After much discussion, Eleanor agreed to continue teaching him and promised to keep his secret. Pharma then expressed his gratitude by giving her some flowers and then said goodbye. Sometime after he left, Eleanor took the medicine Pharma had brought her, and the next day she showed up to give him more lessons, thanking him for the medicine as it seemed to have had quite an effect. During the lesson, it became clear that Pharma really couldn't control his magical abilities properly, and the lesson ended with Eleanor all wet and covered in sand. Back home, Pharma noticed that one of his maids had reflux esophagitis, another had thrush, a third had pharyngitis, a fourth had chronic simple rhinitis, and finally one had gonorrhosis. Pharma noted everything in his notebook and reflected that in this world his existence was considered heresy, because if his lack of shadow and his abilities were discovered, in the worst-case scenario he could be arrested or even executed. And to avoid this situation he would need to become indispensable, at least to the people of that place. It was then that he realized that Lot had a skin condition called eczema deforme, and while exploring another room, he found several classic tools for manipulating medicines. So he decided first to create a moisturizing and paranoid cream for Lot and began to gather the necessary elements. When he gave it to her, Lot was so excited that she wanted to share it with everyone. But Pharma explained that medicines should not be shared. He then went out to personally deliver a medicine to each employee. When he asked Lot why the laundress had cried when she received her gift, she explained that the employees never received anything from their noble masters, so this was something new. Furthermore, noble pharmacists should not care for commoners. This left Pharma conflicted, as he felt it wasn't so different from the real world. Still, he thought it was wrong and wanted to change the situation by creating affordable medicines. The next morning, during lunch, the atmosphere was quiet, and people looked worried. Bruno reported that Blanche had chickenpox. This bothered Pharma, who knew that the disease was not the result of some exotic chicken dish, but rather a viral infection. He wondered why the fantasy world would have chickenpox, but figured Blanche would have a chance to recover, as she was still very young. Bruno ordered everyone to stay away from her for 3 weeks to avoid contagion. However, Pharma was an exception, as he had already contracted the disease and was probably immune. When he saw Bruno coughing, Pharma was alert but said nothing. He immediately went to the laboratory to prepare a remedy for chickenpox. The necessary substance was difficult to conjure, and the process took a while to work. He went to Blanche's room where she was visibly ill, with spots scattered across her face. She asked him to leave, but he said he had brought her some medicine. Blanche protested, as she hated bitter medicine like any child. So Pharma mixed the powder into macaroons and made her eat them. However, she remembered that Bruno had said there was no cure for chickenpox. Pharma claimed he had found the cure in a book at the library, but Blanche retorted that there was no way there could be a book there that Bruno didn't know about. Realizing she was right, Pharma replied that it would be their secret, which convinced her not to insist any further. He also noticed that she was scratching and asked her to avoid spreading the virus, even though the concept of viruses did not exist in that world. Blanche wanted to learn more from him, so Pharma compared the virus to a ghost, which scared her. While he was taking care of her, Blanche commented on how much kinder he had become, and said that it made her love him even more. This reminded him of his sister in his previous life. A few days later, Bruno was surprised to see that Blanche had already recovered. When he asked what had happened, she said it was a secret. Later in the lab, Pharma concluded that it was normal, even for someone with a cold appearance. He could create substances out of thin air, functioned like a walking MRI machine, and his eyes could magnify images. To top it off, he had no shadow, which was strange. He ended up inventing a simple microscope while praising his own genius and was called by a butler to Bruno's office. Upon arriving there, Bruno asked Pharma to pack his things, as they would be taken immediately to the Empress. Meanwhile, Bruno's cough worsened, and he explained that the Empress's condition had suddenly deteriorated. Pharma wanted to use his divine eye, but he couldn't. When he asked what was wrong with the Empress, Bruno replied that it was a secret, and insisted that he get ready. In the castle, the chief physician of the palace, Claudio, paced back and forth as Bruno entered with Pharma. All the aristocrats were gathered in the hall as if it were awake. Bruno and Pharma went to the Empress to greet her. She turned out to be young, and her name was Queen Elizabeth II. While Bruno fulfilled his responsibilities, Pharma acted as his assistant, keeping his distance. Pharma watched Bruno collect a blood sample from the Empress and use magic to examine it before meeting with the other doctors to discuss the case. He heard comments about stars and how her life was coming to an end. Even so, Bruno prepared some anesthetic potions to numb her, so she would no longer feel pain. The Empress even asked him to tell her the truth about her condition, but Bruno insisted that she still had a chance of survival before administering the anesthetic. From everyone's attitudes, Pharma realized that they had given up on her, and this made him angry. He then used his divine eye to examine her and discovered that she was suffering from lung cancer, tuberculosis, and other serious illnesses. He thought about how the compound needed to treat her was so complex that it might be impossible to create it perfectly through conjuration. At that moment, the prince entered desperately, asking for his mother's recovery. The boy's presence only added to the gravity of the situation, as everyone was powerless in the face of the situation. Pharma then gathered his courage and stepped forward. When he said he wanted to try treating her with a new medicine, Bruno tried to stop him so that he would not embarrass the family. However, the Empress interrupted him, stating that she trusted him because of his divine art, and therefore authorized the treatment. Immediately, Pharma locked himself in the laboratory and wrote the formula for 4 medicines that should be used together. He began to conjure them one by one with only the power of his mind. Bruno entered the laboratory aggressively and ordered him to stop this madness, but Pharma refused. Bruno argued that tuberculosis had no cure, which surprised Pharma, who realized that his father was capable of making accurate diagnoses without any special powers. Even so, Bruno thought his son was lying and would end up giving the Empress false hope. Pharma replied that he should take the medicine himself, and went back to work. Faced with this, Bruno attacked him from behind, trying to stop him by force. Pharma resisted and blocked the second attack, creating a thick wall of ice that divided the laboratory in half. Bruno realized that Pharma had not used a wand or spell, and asked who he really was. Pharma remained silent. When Bruno saw the notebook with the formulas for the medicines, Pharma made up a story that he had dreamed about it when the lightning struck. Bruno then saw the sacred mark and decided to attribute everything to Panactius's blessing, becoming visibly pleased. Pharma asked his father to take credit for creating the formula to boost his political career, but Bruno refused, stating that he should take responsibility for his words and live up to the Empress's expectations. Faced with this, Pharma broke down the wall of ice, which surprised Bruno even more, as he noticed a huge difference between the son he knew and the young man before him. Bruno even questioned whether he was really his son. Pharma simply replied that he considered him his father. After that, he returned to the others, covering his face as if he were a discreet surgeon. When he went to present the medicine to the Empress, Claudio asked Bruno to stop his insane son. but Bruno replied that Pharma might have already overcome them. Pharma then used a microscope to show the Empress tiny creatures dancing inside her lungs. The Empress ordered Claudio to look too, and everyone in the hall took turns observing the new discovery. Pharma explained that these organisms were called bacteria and that most diseases were caused by microorganisms. After the explanation, he said he would need to observe her every day for 6 months and even put his life on the line as a guarantee. He then drank his own dose of the medicine, and soon after the Empress took it too. He then declared with conviction that tuberculosis would no longer be an incurable disease. On the way home, the silence in the carriage made Bruno thoughtful. He remembered when Pharma was little, and how he always treated him only as a future doctor, without caring about his normal life, until the moment when the gods struck him with lightning. Although they had not been close in the past, Bruno knew that the young man in front of him was not the same son as before. As they got out of the carriage, Pharma handed him the same medicine and Bruno accepted it, saying he would do it at Panactius's request. Pharma then admitted that he did not know what it meant to be a real pharmacist, having only received a special skill. So he asked Bruno to guide him for as long as he could, and the two shook hands like true knights. 3 months passed, and Pharma and Bruno began to have a closer relationship as pharmacists, exchanging ideas and learning from each other as equals. Bruno said that a famous doctor had asked him about the cure for tuberculosis, but Pharma explained that for now only he could produce it. Bruno replied that he had already dismissed the doctor, saying that the cure was the work of Panactius and his divine arts. Pharma had to interrupt him to say that he planned to make the recipe accessible in the future, as soon as he could produce it without using magic. Bruno believed that Pharma was guided by the will of Panactius and decided to accept, as this had always been his weakness. Bruno warned that Pharma's methods could seem heretical, and that this would put his life at risk among both pharmacists and nobles. In addition, he said that there were suspicions that the Empress could have been infected on purpose. Pharma, however, found this hypothesis unlikely, since the infection rate after exposure was only 10%. Once again, Bruno treated his words as divine knowledge and withdrew, wanting to keep his distance. Before leaving, Bruno looked at Pharma's detailed analysis and remembered a heretic who had almost gone mad because of his research. At the castle, Pharma met Lord Noah, who pulled him aside and revealed that the Empress planned to reward him for saving her life. When Noah asked if there was anything he wanted, Pharma replied that he was satisfied. But Noah insisted, saying that he was now an important figure. Noah offered him money or even a harem of girls with cat ears, but Pharma was at a loss for words. After much insistence, Pharma said he would like to open his own pharmacy, accessible to all social classes. Noah was surprised, as he had refused something comparable to a blank check. In the Empress's chambers, she said that the medicine was working, and that her recovery was evident. Pharma warned her not to rely too much on miracle drugs, as complications could still arise. She understood that he just wanted her to be careful, and joked about the fact that he had boasted about the cure in front of the best doctors in the kingdom. She then said that everyone was already planning her funeral after her collapse, and that her authority as ruler had been ignored. She felt she did not deserve to return to the throne after feeling useless for so long. Pharma disagreed, reminding her that her son Louis still needed his mother, as did the entire kingdom. Somehow he managed to convince her to believe in herself again. As he left, Pharma commented that both he and she had been close to death, and therefore should seek to live a more meaningful life. The next day, Bruno had Pharma accompany him, dressed appropriately as a nobleman. Pharma felt that the attire did not suit him, but he was reminded that he was the son of an archduke. In the royal hall, the queen was introduced and summoned Bruno to grant him a new territory, rich in medicinal herbs. Then Pharma was called, but he thought it was a mistake. He then knelt down and was promoted from apprentice to official royal physician. While Pharma was still confused by it all, Bruno had to bring him back to reality. He was given a brooch, formalizing his position. The Empress also granted him permission to open a pharmacy in the royal capital. That afternoon, a group of engineers showed up at his house to ask for the specifications of the pharmacy he wanted to build. Although he said he wasn't ready yet, they claimed they needed to start immediately or they would be held responsible. Fortunately, Eleanor showed up to help, and this made Pharma realize he had no choice. He then drew a design he already had in mind. After a few months, the building was completed. The chief engineer asked what name should be on the sign. They began to think of appropriate names, but the engineer overheard Pharma talking to himself and decided to adopt the name Pharmacy from Another World. When the work was finished, Eleanor thought everything was beautiful, although Pharma said it was all the result of a misunderstanding. She also commented that the name Suve would not prevent the pharmacists' union from creating problems. While they were talking, a suspicious merchant appeared asking who the owner of the place was. When the pharmacist introduced himself, the man revealed himself to be Varan, the master of the pharmacists' union. He said that given Pharma's age, he would probably sell candy. Pharma remained calm and responded to the provocations with tranquility. When Varan wanted to know if the prices would be high, Pharma said he intended to sell affordable medicines. This made Varan angry. Eleanor then intervened and insulted him until he left the premises. While doing a final check of the pharmacy, Pharma realized that there was no one responsible for the finances. Lot offered to take on the role, but Pharma was suspicious because she was just a child. When he refused, Lot began to cry and begged to help. He then promised to let her be in charge of deliveries, which she accepted with great joy. Later, when he arrived home, Pharma noticed that everyone was emotional. Cedric explained that he had been asked to retire. Although it seemed strange, since Cedric had always taken good care of the property's finances, he said that the master was probably concerned about his weakened knee. Pharma promised to treat the problem as long as Cedric agreed to work in her pharmacy, and they both agreed to the new arrangement. He then spoke to Bruno, who said he could do whatever he wanted, since he had fired Cedric. Bruno also gave him a chest full of gold to start the business, saying he wanted to do something grand for his son. Pharma realized that Bruno had done this intentionally to make Cedric available, although no one brought up the subject directly. Still, he thanked everyone for their consideration. Weeks passed, but the pharmacy remained empty. Pharma thought about how to improve the situation, and Eleanor explained that it was normal, as commoners preferred local pharmacies while nobles called pharmacists to their homes. People seemed curious, but no one wanted to be the first to enter. During a staff meeting, Pharma expressed that his main interest was to help commoners, but everyone was treating the pharmacy as if it were a psychiatric hospital. At that moment, Lot appeared with some papers she called a survey, conducted with 100 city residents. She began to read the content as if it were a formal report, receiving applause from everyone. Half of the people interviewed said that the royal seal at the entrance frightened them. Others said they did not know how to behave in front of nobles, and preferred to stay away for fear of being punished for something trivial. Some commented that the knights at the entrance were intimidating, and others doubted a child's ability to run the place. These seemed to be simple problems that could be solved with time and reputation. The team then decided to update the prices in the window to attract more customers. That afternoon, Mr. Jen entered the store to buy candy and took the opportunity to drink the mineral water available. The team was happy with the visit and wished that more people like him would come. Pharma asked if Jen was a sailor and tried to sell him vitamin C candies to prevent scurvy, but Jen soon found an excuse to leave. When Pharma followed him to the door, he saw Jen talking to some merchants and upon closer inspection, realized that two street performers were actually his parents in disguise. Inside the store, his mother said something unusual, but he ignored her and wanted to know why they were hiding. She replied that she just wanted to see how he was doing, and Bruno asked to take a tour of the pharmacy. Pharma began by showing him the first floor, which had a product display window, a laboratory, and a waiting room. The second floor housed an examination room and a rest area for patients. The third floor was dedicated to the basic tasks of the employees and had a kitchen. The top floor was Pharma's personal laboratory, where he developed new medicines. After the tour, Bruno asked about customer traffic, noting that he had seen several nobles but no commoners. Pharma replied sadly that he had not yet managed to attract commoners. His mother then suggested that he add cosmetics to the product line, as this could be a success and attract ordinary people, since many sought to improve their appearance. Pharma reflected on the fact that he had never worked with cosmetics in his previous life but decided to try. He asked what she recommended, and she suggested a fragranced skin product. Bruno intervened and asked that no white powder be produced. This led his wife to complain, as she had been avoiding using this powder at his request. Bruno explained that in his experience, women who used this type of dye quickly became ill. Pharma was impressed by the observation, since the white powder in question was made with lead and mercury chloride, two heavy metals that are toxic when absorbed by the body. Bruno added that there were women in the city who resorted to bloodletting to achieve pale skin. This was completely nonsensical, and to prevent his wife from doing the same, he told her that she was more beautiful than any other woman, which made her blush. At that moment, a man rushed in asking for help, saying that his wife had fainted and was in critical condition. Pharma went with him to the scene, where they almost didn't let him pass until they saw his royal badge. Inside the carriage, Pharma found a very pale young woman. Upon examining her, he found no specific illness, only several cuts on her wrists that indicated bloodletting performed by a professional. He explained that she was anemic because she had drained the blood necessary for her body. She replied that the procedure had been performed by someone qualified. Pharma pointed out that the cuts were infected and that she needed urgent treatment. At the pharmacy, the young woman said that she had been rejected by her love interest for not being pale enough, so she tried to change her appearance to be accepted. Even after nearly dying, she still wanted to become a doll to win the boy's affection. Pharma prescribed medication and asked her to stop using the white powder, but she refused, saying she needed to be desired or her family would consider her useless. Lot asked Pharma to help the girl, so he thought of an alternative and asked her to come back in a week. A few days later, Pharma tested a prototype on himself, which left him looking exaggerated, but the girls seemed to like it. Eleanor was concerned about the safety of the product, but Pharma reassured her, saying that unlike mercury, his formula was made with safe ingredients. She suggested that a ban be imposed on the use of white powder, and Pharma said he was already planning to talk to the Empress about it. The following week, the pale young woman returned to pick up the cosmetics. Pharma calmly and carefully demonstrated how to apply sunscreen and moisturizers properly, while she watched intently. Eleanor finished applying the cosmetics and confessed that she had gone from looking dull to almost unrecognizable. She cried with joy as she thanked Pharma for saving her from ugliness and anemia. The next day, Lot went to the market to promote the new product to other insecure women who immediately showed interest. Even an elderly lady wanted to try it, but said she couldn't read. Lot then handed her a visual manual designed for those who couldn't read. Soon the pharmacy began to prosper, which showed that people cared more about their appearance than their health. However, a new complaint soon arose. Chloe's appearance had returned to its previous poor state, as the new shipment had sold out before she could buy it. Pharma apologized and explained that it did not have enough staff to meet the demand of a city full of insecure people. To solve the problem, Chloe proposed that Pharma create a subsidiary with her family, offering financing and labor. Pharma looked at Cedric, who said it was a good deal, and he accepted the proposal. In just 1 week, Chloe had already established a cosmetics branch and hired more employees who would work enthusiastically in exchange for a lifetime supply of the products that masked their insecurities. A few weeks passed, and Lot appeared to present the results of his new research to the team. This time, the reports were much more positive in all aspects, and everyone celebrated the fact that they had overcome the initial obstacles. A few days later, the Pharma family took a vacation to visit the new territory that the Empress had granted Bruno some time ago. Once at the mansion, Bruno praised the local administrator for his good management and asked for a full report on his activities, which began to be presented immediately. The city was known for being an important port that connected the empire to other nations, and also for being one of the largest producers of medicinal herbs. Soon, the adults began talking about complicated matters, such as tax evasion, and Bruno, realizing that Pharma was out of place, sent him to play in the sea. Pharma then joined Lot and Blanche, who had built a sandcastle. Blanche wanted to go into the water, but he reminded everyone that they couldn't swim, which left the three of them frustrated. However, after listening to the girls' insistent pleas, Pharma gave in to their request. As they approached the sea, Pharma noticed Eleanor resting under a tree. However, she got up saying she also wanted to swim. Eleanor then took off her belt and started playing, which made Pharma hope that it wouldn't turn into an awkward situation. When Eleanor asked if he would also go in, a simple glance at Blanche took all the excitement out of Pharma, as she reminded him of his sister from another life. He remembered the moments when he played with his sister on the beach, and how she wanted to grow up quickly. However, she had died young. While he was immersed in his memories, he heard screams, as Blanche had been swept away by the current. Pharma dove in without hesitation. Even though the current was pulling Eleanor back, Blanche was being pulled away with great force and began to drown. When he saw her sinking, he shouted her name so intensely that his emblem emitted a strong light that opened up space in the sea, creating a dry area in the ocean. Eleanor woke up and saw Pharma holding back the waters as he slowly walked back to the beach. She could only watch in awe. When everything calmed down, Eleanor wanted to know what he had done, and Pharma replied that it was perhaps his divine art of negative water. Eleanor disagreed, as that kind of ability could not nullify water in that way down to the sand at the bottom. Pharma noticed Lottie was scared, and was about to blame himself, but Eleanor said he was amazing for saving Blanche all by himself. That night, Pharma reflected on how he had literally removed the salt from the bottom of the sea, which meant that luckily he hadn't hurt Blanche or Eleanor. He also realized that Lottie was trying to hide her fear of him. When she tried to start a conversation, he quickly assured her that he would no longer use his powers in that way, and that she didn't need to be afraid. However, Lottie said she wasn't scared, but rather impressed by what she saw. She apologized for not running to save Blanche, as that was her responsibility. But Farmer replied that it was natural, since she couldn't swim. When he said he considered her part of the family, Lottie was moved and left crying with joy. Elsewhere that night, news reached the church that a boy had wiped out part of the sea in a port city. The information came from a child in an orphanage, which made the group almost ignore the story until the priest mentioned that traces of divine energy had been found at the site days later. Upon hearing this, the leader ordered them to locate a boy without a shadow who should be eliminated for being a heretic. In the capital, business at the pharmacy was even busier than before. Eleanor joked that Pharma should be careful not to die of exhaustion. Pharma also noticed some suspicious priests whispering in a corner and approached them to ask what they wanted, but received only threatening looks before they left. That afternoon, the employees commented on the strange men. Lot said they hadn't bought anything, and Eleanor noted that their clothes looked foreign. Lot suggested they warn the guards to be on the lookout. That night, the knights at the pharmacy were changing shifts when a loaded wagon crashed through the gates. Upon receiving the news, Bruno was furious and vowed to capture those responsible. After ordering the knight to return to his post, Pharma prepared to go to the pharmacy. But Bruno stopped him and asked if he had any suspects in mind. Pharma thought of Veron and the men in tunics, but concluded that it would be best not to act on impulse. Bruno recommended that he remain on alert. When Pharma arrived at the scene, Cedric explained that no one had been injured, but the cart loaded with sediment had caused damage to the facade and the goods on display. Cedric then used a simple divine art to eliminate the bad smell. Later, Cedric revealed that they had transferred the important medicines to the cosmetics branch, where they would continue to operate until everything was restored. During the conversation, Old Gem appeared with a group of helpers to assist with the cleanup. The townspeople also supported Pharma, offering help in every way possible. Sometime later, a young woman entered the pharmacy with a worried expression and looked for Pharma. When he asked what had happened, she said that her father had fainted from the heat and would not wake up. Although he didn't want to leave, everyone insisted that he go help. Pharma then mounted a horse with the young woman and set off for a remote area. Along the way, he thought about how he would treat a case of dehydration. But before he knew it, the young woman disappeared, and he found himself surrounded by men dressed in white. The leader of the group asked if he was responsible for erasing part of the sea and revealed that everyone there was an inquisitor of the Holy Kingdom. This reminded him of Eleanor's explanations about the importance of the temple, which trained children to use divine arts and also granted noble titles. She said that the temple chose the rulers of each nation, thus occupying the top of the power hierarchy. One of the most feared arms of the institution was that of the Inquisitors, whose mission was to eliminate evil spirits and heretics. Pharma recalled that Eleanor had described them as a group of unstable elites. When the leader introduced himself as Solomon of the Great Temple, Pharma took a serious stance. They accused him of being an evil spirit, and asked him to retreat, which he did reluctantly, allowing them to activate a spell to immobilize him. However, it took only a small effort for him to break the spell. Then the mounted men surrounded him, and one of them attacked with fire. Pharma created a shield to protect himself and removed the oxygen around him to extinguish the flames. Another enemy attacked with ice swords, but he also managed to defend himself. When he tried to talk calmly, Solomon gave the order for everyone to eliminate him at once. Pharma panicked as enemies advanced from all sides with coordinated attacks. The attacks raised a large cloud of dust, which soon dissipated, revealing that Pharma had protected himself with a wall of ice. He then created a huge block of ice while his body glowed intensely. He asked them to cease their attacks, saying he preferred to use his powers to heal rather than to fight. Solomon then noticed the mark of Panacteus on Pharma, and in light of the feats he had accomplished, declared that Pharma was the god Panacteus himself. Pharma did not understand what that meant, but Solomon continued, stating that he had already received divine punishment, as he had suffered a serious injury when he fell from his horse. Solomon knelt and offered his life as a way of asking for forgiveness. As he was preparing to take his own life, Pharma stopped him at the last moment. Pharma examined Solomon's leg and concluded that it would have to be amputated. However, as the leg glowed red, he opted for a reductive treatment, and the glow disappeared, indicating that the decision was correct. The next problem was finding someone capable of performing the operation, since Pharma was a pharmacist. After considering all the possibilities, he decided that he would have to perform the operation himself. Pharma then conjured a stone bed out of thin air and asked the priest to set up a tent. When everything was ready, he entered the tent and explained the procedure he would perform. After receiving the patient's permission, he dressed appropriately and applied anesthesia to Solomon's spinal cord. After the procedure was completed, the group that had previously attacked him began to treat him like a god. Pharma, however, asked for only one thing, that everything they had seen be kept secret. Months passed until Solomon, now promoted to bishop, visited Pharma's pharmacy bringing sweets as if celebrating some holiday. Pharma questioned how someone who led a group of persecutors had become a bishop. Solomon explained that he had gone through many trials to become useful to Pharma and that he would now dedicate his life to protecting his secret. This devotion made Pharma a little uncomfortable. Pharma also noticed several boys parading through the pharmacy, and Solomon took him into a room to present a sacred wand known as the treasure of the guardian god's temple. Solomon explained that the wand possessed all attributes including healing and that it could change shape. Pharma felt he was not worthy of holding such a sacred artifact, but Solomon insisted. When Pharma touched the wand, it glowed brightly, impressing everyone present, including Eleanor. Pharma tried to hand the wand to Eleanor, but it passed right through his hand. Solomon then explained that this artifact was from another world, and that only divine beings from outside that world could hold it. Taking it again, Pharma asked if the wand could float. Solomon replied that there were ancient records suggesting this possibility. Pharma tested it, and the wand did indeed float, leaving Solomon and Eleanor excited. Before leaving, Solomon promised that the temple would not bother him anymore, but made it clear that the incident with the carriage was not their doing, and that Pharma still had enemies. He also gave Pharma a talisman to suppress his divine powers. When Pharma used the talisman, his shadow returned, which made him happier than when he received the wand itself. Later, he strolled through the city with Blanche and Lot. As he walked, he thought about how difficult it would be to hire more employees. It was then that he heard a customer asking a pharmacy clerk why they didn't sell Pharma's products. The man replied that the store sold strange medicines at very low prices, which caused suspicion. The store owner appeared and explained that Pharma's products needed union approval to be sold. Back at his pharmacy, Pharma had the idea of creating a new union. Since Varan continued to be an obstacle, he hoped that everything would work out, as he didn't want to overload himself again, although Eleanor thought the idea was funny. Meanwhile, at the pharmacist union, members discussed ways to sabotage Pharma after he survived the attack. Varan believed that Pharma had only managed to restore the pharmacy because of his divine powers or his father's money. Seeing that the others were leaving, he reminded them that Pharma was hurting business, so they should confront him. He forbade all union members from approaching the pharmacy under penalty of losing their licenses. Later, a man desperately knocked on a doctor's door, carrying his sick daughter. Luckily, Pharma was passing by and offered to help. The man, being a union member, hesitated but changed his mind and went with Pharma to the pharmacy. When they entered through a side entrance, the man thought it was the entrance for commoners. Inside, Pharma handed him a mask, making the man realize that Pharma was protecting his customers from contagion. Pharma began by asking basic questions, such as his daughter's name and age, what she had eaten, and other details that surprised the father. As the girl was unconscious, Pharma took her body measurements. When the man asked why, Pharma explained that he needed this data to calculate the correct dosage of the medication. After that, he used his divine eye to examine her, which aroused even more curiosity. Pharma then explained that the girl, named Marie, only had a bad cold. The local pharmacist did not believe him, as he had noticed several symptoms, but Pharma insisted that it was a cold caused by a virus. The girl's father did not understand many of the terms used by Pharma, but he understood that the medicine should be administered by inhalation, not orally. After that, Pharma let them rest. By evening, Marie's health had improved considerably. As he accompanied them back home, Pharma promised to see her again if her symptoms worsened. At the gate, the father expected a very high bill, but was surprised to learn that the amount would be equivalent to that of a large loaf of bread. At home, the man's wife was concerned to learn that he had visited Pharma's pharmacy, but he said he had no other choice. He then went on to praise Pharma, saying that he genuinely cared about Marie. He confessed that, as a pharmacist, learning something from Pharma could help him a lot, but that it would mean confronting the union. His wife remembered the debts the pharmacy had incurred, but realized he had already made his decision and began to cry. At the next union meeting, Varan said he had destroyed all the cosmetics his wife had bought from Pharma. Others whispered that even the bishop frequented the pharmacy. Varan then asked Pierre what he thought of the situation, since his store was closer to the pharmacy. Pierre took a deep breath and replied firmly, asking if any of those present had ever seen the medicines Pharma produced. No one answered positively. Pierre said they needed to see for themselves, as he had done. He said he had sought help there and that everyone was treated equally and the prices were affordable. Varan was furious and tried to find excuses to call Pharma a demon. He said that a nobleman had ignored him in a moment of need, and that as divine powers were limited, he had had to bury his own son. Varin insisted that Pharma had to be eliminated at all costs, but Pierre tried to convince the others to learn from the new competitor, rather than relying on luck and outdated knowledge. He was being convincing, until Varin silenced him and kicked him out of the meeting. That afternoon, Pharma found Pierre sitting in front of his vandalized store. Pierre said he had confronted the union and as a result had been punished. He said he would have to leave the country if he wanted to continue practicing his profession. Pharma replied that this would not be necessary, as he had just founded a new union. He invited Pierre to join him, which moved the man. Pierre reopened his shop with some products supplied by Pharma. As he prepared for the grand opening, Marie encouraged him. Pierre was surprised to find a line of customers waiting outside. Years earlier, a genius named Camus had been arrested by the temple, despite having contributed significantly to the kingdom's medical advancement. In his final moments, young Bruno wanted to understand why he had performed human experiments. Camus replied that it was all part of the cycle of life, in which people die and are born every day. While trying to explain the importance of the experiments, Bruno awoke from a nightmare. During lunch, Pharma noticed that he seemed upset, and asked what had happened. However, Bruno chose not to mention Camus that morning. At that moment, a letter from Powell, his eldest son, was delivered. Bruno read the message informing him that Powell's visit to the family home would be postponed, which worried his mother, as she was eagerly awaiting his arrival. Lotte and Blanche began to talk about how Powell was a genius, and said that it was obvious that Pharma was also incredible. Shortly after that, Pharma and Bruno went to the office, where Bruno reminded Pharma about the St. Fliu Fair, a month-long event that brought together merchants from all over the world in the capital. Bruno warned Pharma to be careful, as there were reports of a strange epidemic that had broken out on an island in a neighboring country. According to him, Powell's letter described that more than 1,000 settlers had died. This worried Pharma, and he wanted to know more details. But Bruno added that even the research team that collected samples had recently died, confirming that the disease was contagious. Bruno revealed that although the epidemic had been contained, products from the island would be sent to the fair with the risk of being contaminated. To make matters worse, the goods would be unloaded at the port in Bruno's new jurisdiction. The fact that all information about the epidemic had been destroyed frightened Pharma, as it indicated that the situation was out of control. In Powell's report, the first researcher had a high fever, followed by vomiting and headaches, developing swelling in the neck before dying on the 7th day. The second researcher died more quickly, with different symptoms including darkening of the skin. At this point, everyone understood the gravity of the situation. Pharma asked for more details, and Bruno read about a new device created by an unidentified person, who was actually Pharma and his microscope. Pharma learned that the researchers had used his microscope and managed to observe the virus, so he asked Powell to send the notes on the discovery. Meanwhile, a meeting was held at the palace where it was reported that the mortality rate in the kingdom had decreased by more than 20% since the founding of Pharma's pharmacy. Everyone recognized his positive influence on the kingdom, and the Empress suggested rewarding him. She considered naming him Archduke, but Mary reminded her that this title could not be granted to minors. During the meeting, the Empress also reflected on the possibility that Pharma was possessed by some entity, and wanted to help him act freely. At the pharmacy, Pharma explained the fatal disease to Eleonore. She suggested canceling the fair. Lot appeared with a letter from Powell, and when he saw the drawings attached, Pharma was shocked. He recognized that it was the Yersinia pestis bacterium. Immediately, Pharma sent personnel to the port to start a quarantine, and they promised to act quickly. Then Pharma and Eleonore sought out Bruno and told him that the epidemic was probably the Black Death. Bruno already suspected this after some reading. Pharma recalled that the bubonic plague had a mortality rate of about 70% in the 17th century. They explained the preventive measures they had taken. Even so, Bruno stressed that the empire would be doomed if there was an outbreak, as there was no definitive cure. Pharma revealed that he had developed a new medicine and sent it to be packaged just in case. Although Bruno was impressed with the speed, Pharma stated that it was still essential to prevent an outbreak, as he was the only one capable of producing the medicine. Given this, they asked the Empress to inspect the goods at the capital's gate. In addition, Pharma requested the elimination of disease vectors, such as fleas and rats. The Empress immediately took steps to comply with the request. Bruno thanked her for acting quickly, but she replied that she had complete confidence in Pharma. That same day, Pharma showed Pierre the compound microscope he had built, explaining that it would prevent direct contact with the bacteria. He also reported that the medicine had already been packaged and would be distributed free of charge as needed. After the preparations, Pharma left the capital in Pierre's care. At the same time, the Empress received information about the preparations for the fair, which were proceeding as planned, and the inspection points were not causing any delays. Bishop Solomon had also sent priests in case purification was necessary. The Empress asked that the matter of the epidemic be kept secret to prevent enemies from using the situation to cause chaos. Meanwhile, he, Honor, and Pharma were preparing to leave, and when she noticed that he was scared, she tried to encourage him, pointing out that Lot was rooting for him. When they arrived at the port city, they observed the ships awaiting inspection, and thought about how just one contaminated ship could destroy the Empire's prosperity. They met with the team sent earlier, who reported that all the ships were already anchored and handed over the inspection documents. Even the ships that passed inspection had their cargoes purified as a precaution. Pharma and Eleanor joined the inspection team and boarded a ship with an impatient merchant. They spoke with the ship's doctor, who cooperated with the inspection. After analysis, Pharma found no irregularities in the cargo, but prescribed medication to the crew members who were suffering from scurvy. As they set off for the next ship, the sailors began to argue to speed up their inspections. The commotion grew, and Eleanor drew her wand, but the group calmed down when they heard cannon fire from the Empire's Scarlet Navy. It was revealed that old Jenny was a Navy commander. He announced that Pharma was a royal pharmacist and the son of an archduke, which surprised the sailors. Jenny threatened to sink any ship that disrespected Pharma. Pharma's team reunited with Jenny, who really just wanted more candy from the store. The crew said that since they started eating the candy from the pharmacy, they no longer suffered from scurvy. Pharma was happy to hear that the product was helping. Even after several inspections, Eleanor was still concerned about the possibility of an outbreak of the Black Death. She asked everyone to remain vigilant. It was then that Adam, the interim governor, appeared with a grim report. Residents of the village of Istak were dying of high fevers. The village was to the west, and everything indicated that some sailors had escaped inspection and fled there. The disease was spreading too fast. Pharma decided to go there immediately. Even though Eleanor insisted that he should not go, he explained the magnitude of the risk, and said that she needed to act instead of just complaining, since she had people and equipment at her disposal. Then he activated his divine wand and flew away. During the journey, he got lost in his own thoughts and ended up hitting a bird, almost falling from the sky. He barely regained his balance. When he almost hit a tree, he closed his eyes reflexively but passed through the trunk thanks to the power of his wand. When he arrived at the village, he saw several residents fleeing in despair. He asked them to stay, but they all refused, terrified of the disease. In seconds they panicked and began to call him an evil spirit, since he had practically appeared out of nowhere in front of them. When the residents raised their weapons against him, Pharma wasted no time. He used his wand and created a huge dome of ice around the entire village, leaving everyone speechless. With that, he explained that he was not there to hurt anyone. In fact, he was the royal pharmacist sent to save them. As soon as they saw his official badge, the residents finally calmed down and began to ask for help. Pharma quickly organized everything and divided the village into 3 zones, one for the severely infected, another for milder cases, and the last for those who did not yet have symptoms. Some men thought he intended to eliminate the sick, but he made it clear that it was just a way to prioritize those who needed it most. Meanwhile, at the port, the Navy spotted a ship heading toward the coast. After further analysis, they concluded that it was probably the vessel that had fled the inspection. The ship was flying distress flags, which was a clear sign of contamination. As they approached, one of the young observers realized that everyone on board was already dead. Commander Jane decided there was no reason to board the ship, and ordered the cannons to be prepared to sink it along with the contaminants. Before firing, Jane recalled that Pharma always tried to save everyone, but he also remembered that this ship had ignored the inspection. After that, he said a prayer and gave the order to attack. Elsewhere, a group of men were talking about needing more people for the job. When a woman volunteered, they refused her after looking at her. It was Professor Blackmold, who was about to retire. In her office, her assistant called her Casper, but she replied that in addition to her age, her field fungi and microorganisms was no longer valued in modern medicine. While reflecting on this, she received an urgent call to appear at the president's office. Back in Stack, Pharma entered the first isolation building. As soon as she opened the door, some men were surprised and questioned what a child was doing there. Before the situation escalated, another man intervened, saying he had seen Solomon recently and knew that Pharma was Panactio. With the confusion resolved, they explained that the biggest problem was not being able to differentiate between who was infected and who was not. Pharma then instructed that everyone present receive medication while he examined the patients one by one. He used his divine eye to diagnose them individually and observed that treatment was possible when the light disappeared. He informed the man that he was lucky to have only a cold and could therefore leave the isolation center. Pharma even used his wand to speed up the healing process. It was clear, however, that he could not handle the situation alone, especially with the contaminated cargo still on its way to the capital. After administering the medicine, the men asked Pharma what the next step would be. He said they should leave immediately and intercept the contaminated shipments before they reached the capital. At the port, Eleanor and her team had finished their inspection rounds, but she still warned her subordinate not to let her guard down. Eleanor thought Pharma had handled the situation better and wished she had learned more from him. Recognizing that she did not have special powers like him, she tried to end the subject, but her assistant disagreed, explaining that although Pharma was more accurate, Eleanor inspected the cargo more quickly. Upon hearing this, Eleanor was grateful that she was not just another useless person. At the institute, the president, who was Bruno, asked Casper about his research. She interrupted him, thinking he was there to cancel the funding. Casper thanked him for tolerating her work for so long and said she would accept forced retirement. But Bruno stopped her and explained that he actually had an important task for her. When she heard that she might have the chance to save the world, she was shocked. But Bruno calmly handed her a note with instructions for extracting a medicinal substance from a microorganism. When she asked who had written it, Bruno replied that it was confidential and only wanted to know if she was capable of accomplishing the task. Luckily, Casper revealed that she had already had a sample of that microorganism in her laboratory for years and showed Bruno the sample that she thought was useless, just like she did. Bruno then announced that all resources would be directed toward the production of a new medicine with her in charge, and she promised to do her best. In a stake, Pharma explained to the mayor that they would not be able to save some patients in critical condition, but the mayor still thanked Pharma for keeping the deaths to a minimum. Pharma added that to ensure everyone's safety, residents would need to cooperate and remain in quarantine within the ice wall for 2 weeks. Before leaving, he asked that no one touch animals under any circumstances. He also said goodbye to the priest and flew away on his wand. Soon after, Pharma spotted a fire in the distance and descended to investigate, finding priests burning a cart. The captured merchants initially refused to cooperate, but Pharma warned them that the Black Death was on its way, and insisted that they tell the truth. They confessed that they had 4 carts, one of which was carrying squirrels. They confirmed that the squirrels had been brought from the island decimated by the epidemic, which indicated that the merchants themselves were responsible for spreading the plague. They also admitted that they were accompanied by 24 workers and 5 holy knights, which aroused suspicion. The priests questioned why they were accompanied by nobles. With this information, Pharma concluded that the holy knights had intentionally forced the epidemic into the empire. He also remembered that the empress's infection had been considered a deliberate act, which indicated that there was a mastermind behind it all. The merchants began to demand that they be treated as if they were in their right. The priest wanted to punish them severely, but Pharma said he would treat them regardless of their sins. Meanwhile, Bruno informed the empress about the outbreak, saying that the fugitive crew members would likely reach the capital in a day or 2. She ordered the ministers to reinforce security at the gates, even if it meant canceling the fair. The next day, Lot sold masks to all the merchants he encountered using his charm. Pierre received new samples at the gate to inspect, and one of them contained the Black Death bacteria. Soon after, an attack began outside the gate, and it had to be closed immediately. The Holy Knights destroyed the gate and attacked the guards. Despite the danger, Pierre ran to check if the medicines in the camp were protected. There he saw the knights bringing a cage full of white squirrels that they released in the capital. They threw them using wind powers. Upon seeing the squirrels, Pierre understood the danger and ordered the guards to sound the alarm to warn that something serious had happened. With the ringing of the bell, it was reported in the royal hall that holy knights from Netherland had invaded the city. When asked how many there were, and the answer was 5, the empress sat down wondering why they had not yet been detained. Bruno suggested that they were there to spread the plague. The empress did not understand why Netherland would risk an ancient alliance with such a small attack, especially considering that the country's leader had recently died, which ruled out national action. Bruno argued that someone with advanced knowledge of medicine was behind the action and suggested that the person responsible could be a brilliant pharmacist who had been expelled from the kingdom for conducting human experiments considered heretical. This man had been captured by the Inquisitors, had his divine powers sealed, and was reduced to the status of a commoner. Bruno revealed Camus' name to the Empress, regretting not having eliminated him earlier, even though he knew his intentions. Meanwhile, the knights protected themselves with a wall of ice to avoid the fire attacks and looked for an opening to counterattack the guards. Before they could escape, Solomon appeared and immobilized the knights, using his divine authority to strip them of their powers, as he considered them unworthy. At the same time, Lotte, terrified, wanted to help, but Cedric managed to calm her down. Pharma arrived and climbed the bell tower to assess the extent of the infection with his divine eye. He saw the white squirrels flying freely to spread the disease. On his way down he met Bruno, and together they went to the place where a captured knight was being interrogated. The prisoner claimed he did not know what the Black Death was and that he was only following orders, alleging that Camus was holding the population hostage and could kill thousands with a single command. He declared that Camus was possessed by an evil spirit. When Bruno appeared, the knight died. While the bodies were being burned, Pharma was thinking about producing more medicine when he noticed a sinister presence above his pharmacy. Lotta went to the scene, since the alarms had stopped, but when she arrived they started ringing again. Cedrica let her in and noticed that the doors were unlocked. Lotta had already climbed the stairs and sensed something strange. She looked around and was startled when Cedrica entered. She sighed with relief, but it was short-lived, as Camus appeared and stabbed Cedrica before advancing toward her. Pharma and Bruno ran to the scene and found Lotta and Cedrica injured. Bruno attacked to get Camus's attention, but his ice spells had no effect. Camus revealed his hideous face and began to fight. Pharma couldn't identify the poison used, so he had to guess. Bruno had all his spells blocked, and Camus attacked him with his evil powers. Pharma realized that the poison was conotoxin, but soon identified that it was a compound with multiple poisons. By the time he recognized the second component, Bruno was already being brutally defeated. Camus then took a bottle of a dangerous chemical and began to rant about how only the strong should survive. Before he could use the product, Pharma eliminated him. Camus was furious and attacked Pharma, who responded with a well-aimed blow to the face. Camus tried to convince Pharma to join him in genocide, but Pharma refused and delivered another direct blow. He then attacked with a punch that sent him flying, and before he could get up, he used his wand to exorcise the evil spirit that had taken hold of him, visible by the rainbow light that appeared in the sky. Solomon saw the light and recognized that it symbolized the purification of any disease present in the air and on the earth. Lotte and Cedric regained consciousness, and she hugged him from behind. After the battle, they treated the few infected, while Eleanor managed to prevent an outbreak in the port. Pharma ordered the medicine to be distributed to everyone as a precaution, but Varon refused to accept it from Pierre, although he secretly gave it to his wife out of pride. 2 months later, the Empress officially declared the end of the Black Death pandemic, which meant that the parallel world pharmacy was free to reopen. The first customers were Old Jamie, Bishop Solomon, and several other people. And so we conclude the first part of this story. Like if you enjoyed it and subscribe for more videos. Until next time.